August 1945. The Texas air shimmered with heat, dry and sharp as glass. Dust swirled along the camp fence, clinging to the barbed wire like smoke that refused to lift. Inside the barracks, Japanese women sat in rows, their faces thin from months of anxiety. They waited, bracing themselves for what they thought was inevitable. They had been told the enemy was cruel. In training halls and propaganda leaflets, the Americans were painted as beasts. Bayonets dripped with blood in the posters. Teachers warned, "Capture means dishonor, the enemy will desecrate you." Mothers whispered, "Better death than the hands of Americans." Those words had burned into memory, so the women waited for violence. They waited for shouts, for rough hands, for punishment. The gate creaked open. Boots struck the earth in rhythm. The women stiffened. A line of American soldiers entered the yard. The prisoners pressed their lips shut, holding their breath. But the soldiers did not raise rifles. They did not snarl. Instead, one of them smiled faintly, lifting a canteen. He motioned toward the line of women and offered water. Another set down a box, pulling out bread and passing it carefully, piece by piece. The Japanese stared, frozen. Was this a trick? The silence stretched until Yumi, the youngest, reached out with trembling fingers. The bread was warm, not a blow, not a trap, just bread. She bit into it, eyes wide, then covered her mouth as if expecting punishment. None came. Aiko's heart pounded. She remembered the lectures in Nagoya Hospital. Americans will mutilate. They will treat you as less than human. Yet here she saw men behaving like wardens, yes, but also like caretakers, bound by rules. She whispered to Keiko beside her, "They are not what we were told." Keiko shook her head violently. "It is a trick. Wait." But her own eyes betrayed confusion. The soldiers did not leer, did not touch. They moved with routine, as if this moment were ordinary. The translator spoke in accented Japanese. "You are prisoners of war. You will follow rules. You will be fed. You will not be harmed if you obey." His tone was dry, but the words struck like thunder. The women's eyes darted to one another. Fed? Not harmed? In the stories, no such promises existed. The enemy was supposed to be a monster without laws. And yet, this enemy spoke of law as if it were binding. That night, the barracks hummed with whispers. Why did they smile? Why water? Why bread? The questions circled like moths to a flame. No answer satisfied. The truth was too large. The Americans they saw were not the monsters the empire had promised. Sometimes the greatest shock in war is not defeat in battle. It is the moment you realize the enemy is human, and nothing like the picture painted for you. Keiko lay awake on the hard bunk, the sound of cicadas drilling through the night. The bread still sat heavy in her stomach. She had not eaten so much at once in months, yet it was not hunger that kept her eyes open. It was disbelief. She remembered her school in Osaka. On the classroom wall hung a poster, a cartoon American soldier with a crooked nose and fangs for teeth. In one hand he held a rifle, in the other a screaming Japanese child. The teacher pointed to the image and declared, "This is the enemy. This is what waits for you if Japan fails." Every lesson had carried the same warning. American soldiers were brutes, she was told, men without honor, men who treated women like prey. Capture was worse than death. A good woman would never live to see such humiliation. Yet here she was, captured, alive, fed. The memory of yesterday's scene replayed in her mind like a riddle. The soldier who poured water into her cup had not even looked at her face. He had looked past her, distracted, as though giving water to enemies was no more remarkable than tying his boots. That indifference unsettled her more than cruelty. Cruelty, at least, would have matched the warnings. She turned on her side, whispering into the dark. "We were told they would tear us apart." The words caught in her throat. She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heartbeat rattle against her ribs. Across the barrack, Yumi whispered back, her voice trembling with excitement. "Maybe they are not monsters. Maybe they are softer than our own, Keiko snapped. Be silent, do not believe. But even as she said it, she remembered the thin smile of the guard, the calm order in his tone. There had been no rage, no hatred, only discipline. She thought of her father's words. Before the war, he had warned her, never listen to foreign lies. America is a land of decadence, their men addicted to cruelty. But her father had never seen this camp. He had never seen a soldier lift a canteen to an enemy's lips. Historians later wrote that Japanese propaganda portrayed Americans as savages, incapable of restraint. Leaflets, films, and lectures drilled this image into civilians and soldiers alike. But when captured, many POWs found the opposite: treatment bound by the Geneva Convention, inspections by the Red Cross, rations measured carefully. The shock was not comfort. The shock was contradiction. Keiko closed her eyes, her whisper almost a plea. If this is the enemy, then what was the truth? Who lied to us? Her stomach twisted. Bread had filled her body, but it had also hollowed something deeper. She realized hunger was easier to endure than doubt. Hunger gnawed at the belly. Doubt gnawed at the soul. Sometimes the cruelest wound in war is not inflicted by the enemy. It is the moment you see that your own country's words have deceived you. The mess hall smelled of beans and bread. The Japanese women walked in silently, their eyes darting over the wooden tables. They braced themselves for scraps, for bowls of rotten rice, for the humiliation they had been told would come. Propaganda had described American camps as places of starvation, where prisoners were left to rot like animals. They moved slowly, shoulders hunched, waiting for the cruelty to begin. Instead, soldiers handed them tin trays. On each tray lay bread thick as a fist, a ladle of stew steaming with meat and potatoes, and even a small wedge of fruit. The steam rose in curling trails, rich and unfamiliar. Keiko froze, staring at the portion in front of her. She whispered to Aiko, "It is a trick. They want us to eat before they strike." Her voice trembled, but her stomach growled. Aiko's hand shook as she lifted the spoon. The stew smelled of onions and beef, things she had not seen in months. In Osaka, she had scraped burned rice from the bottom of the pot, her family dividing one sweet potato among 4 mouths. Here, meat floated freely in broth. She tasted it, her lips trembling. It was real. Yumi leaned over her tray, eyes bright. She grinned. "If this is captivity, I will eat until I burst." Her words drew gasps. Some prisoners hissed at her to stay quiet, but the laughter she stifled was contagious. The soldiers watched without expression. To them, it was routine. Feed the prisoners, record the portions, move on. But to the Japanese women, every bite was rebellion against memory. Keiko's mind reeled. In propaganda films, captured Japanese soldiers had been shown crawling in dirt, denied food, begging for life. Now she chewed bread so soft, it crumbled in her mouth. She whispered to herself, "If they feed us like this, then what else was a lie?" Historians later confirmed that rations in American camps often exceeded those of Japanese civilians at home in 1945. Reports from the International Committee of the Red Cross recorded calories, proteins, even vitamins. The numbers told a stark truth. A prisoner in Texas often ate better than a child in Tokyo. Arithmetic became humiliation. Tomiko stared at her tray, tears stinging her eyes. She remembered nights in Yokosuka when air raid sirens wailed and her family crouched in the dark, clutching a bowl of millet, barely enough for 2. She remembered her mother whispering, "Endure. The Americans starve their prisoners. We are stronger." Now, as stew warmed her belly, she realized endurance had been built on lies. After the meal, the women returned to their barracks in silence, the taste of food still heavy on their tongues. For some it was comfort, for others, shame. Aiko whispered, "If they treat enemies this way, what else do they do for their own?" Keiko pressed her hands together. She felt the bread in her stomach like a stone. "Food should not wound," she murmured, "but this does." Sometimes the hardest truth is not hunger itself. It is learning that the enemy you feared feeds you better than your own homeland ever did. The bell rang across the yard, sharp against the dry Texas air. The women were ordered into a line, shuffling nervously toward the small wooden building near the fence. They whispered among themselves, uncertain of what awaited them inside. Some thought of experiments, others of punishment disguised as care. The propaganda had warned them, if captured, they will use your body for their science. Keiko's legs shook as she entered the building. The room smelled of antiseptic, sharp and unfamiliar, nothing like the smoky hospitals of Osaka, where boiled bandages carried the stench of blood. Here the floor was scrubbed, the tables polished, instruments lined neatly in trays. An American officer in a white coat stood waiting. His stethoscope gleamed in the light. A nurse in uniform, also American, also a soldier, took names at the door. Keiko froze. A woman with rank, a woman in command, directing men who obeyed. She had never seen such a sight in her life. The inspection began. One by one, prisoners stepped forward. The doctor checked their eyes, their teeth, their weight. He pressed stethoscopes against thin chests, listening quietly. No one was struck, no one mocked. Notes were written carefully on forms. When Aiko's turn came, she almost fainted. She had expected hands rough with cruelty, but the doctor's touch was clinical, detached. He asked questions through the translator. "Do you feel pain? Do you sleep?" She did not answer at first, convinced a wrong word would bring punishment. But he simply repeated, his voice calm. At last, she whispered, "Yes, pain." He wrote it down and moved on. Tomiko sat on the table, eyes wide as the nurse wrapped her arm with a bandage dipped in disinfectant. The sting made her gasp, but the care was undeniable. Her mind flashed back to Yokosuka, when her own mother had torn strips of cloth from kimonos to bind wounds after air raids. There had been no medicine then, no doctors left in the city, and here, the enemy gave her gauze and antiseptic, as if her life mattered. Historians later recorded these scenes in inspection reports. American POW camps were required by the Geneva Convention to provide medical treatment equal to that given to their own troops. Red Cross inspectors checked supplies, listed bandages, counted doses of quinine. Reports from 1945 note that even Japanese female prisoners were examined regularly, their health monitored, their complaints written into records. Mortality rates in U.S. camps were less than 1%, a fraction compared to the suffering in Japanese camps. Keiko returned to her bunk after the inspection, clutching a small packet of aspirin the nurse had given her. She stared at it as if it were a weapon. The Empire had taught her that Americans had no mercy. Yet here mercy came in tablets, wrapped in paper, handed freely. She whispered, "They fight us in battle, but here they save us." Aiko lay down, her chest heavy. She thought of a comrade in Nagoya who had died of infection when no medicine was left. She wondered what that comrade would think, seeing the enemy clean wounds and write notes as if every life, even a prisoner's, deserved attention. The barrack was quiet that night, each woman holding her thoughts like fragile glass. For some, it was humiliation, to owe survival to the enemy. For others, it was revelation, to see that the enemy did not match the nightmare painted by Tokyo's words. Keiko turned in the dark, clutching the aspirin packet to her chest. She whispered, "If the enemy heals, then what else have we misunderstood?" Sometimes the deepest wound is not in flesh. It is in realizing that even the hand you feared most is capable of care. The days in the camp followed a rhythm, but it was a rhythm none of the Japanese women had expected. Each morning began with roll call, each evening with the clanging of gates. Yet in between, there were moments that defied everything they had been told. One afternoon, the translator entered the barrack with a stack of thin papers and pencils. He spoke calmly. You may write letters, 2 per month. The Red Cross will carry them. His Japanese was accented, but the meaning was unmistakable. The women froze. A letter? From captivity? In Japan, they had been told that prisoners vanished into pits, that the enemy erased them. A letter was proof of survival, proof of voice. The idea was unthinkable. Keiko's hands trembled as she took the sheet. She whispered, "If I write, will it reach them?" The translator nodded. "Yes, as long as you do not describe escape or troop movements. Anything else is permitted." Aiko stared at her blank page for an hour. In Nagoya, she had seen a nurse arrested for a single sentence of doubt. Here she could write about food, about weather, even about complaints. Her pencil scratched slowly. "I am alive. I am fed. Do not fear." The words felt heavier than steel. Yumi scribbled quickly, filling her page with lines about the sun, the dust, the strange taste of American bread. She giggled softly as she wrote, "If my mother reads this, she will think I dream." The letters were collected, placed into a satchel, and carried to the truck. The women watched from the barrack window as the Red Cross emblem faded down the road. Their words, their voices, were leaving the camp. For the first time since capture, they believed their families might know the truth. That night, the barrack buzzed with whispers. What if they censor everything? What if they burn them? The questions swirled, but beneath them pulsed something stronger: hope. Historians later confirmed that the United States, under the Geneva Convention, allowed POWs to write home regularly. The International Committee of the Red Cross carried tens of thousands of such letters across oceans, checking them only for escape information. Many Japanese prisoners complained about food, about boredom, even about guards, and those complaints reached Japan unaltered. The shock was not comfort. The shock was liberty. A week later, another surprise came. A chaplain entered the yard, Bible in hand, offering prayers. The translator explained, "You may worship freely. No one will stop you." The Japanese women exchanged bewildered glances. Religion had been controlled tightly in their homeland, bent to the service of the state. Here, even captives could kneel and speak words without fear. Keiko whispered, "We were told there would be whips, gallows, punishments." She glanced around the barrack. "Instead, there are papers and prayers." Her voice cracked. "Everything they told us was wrong." Aiko lowered her head. "Perhaps that is the cruelest part, to see freedom for the first time in chains." The barrack fell quiet. The rustle of paper, the faint smell of pencil, the echo of whispered prayers, all were more unsettling than the clang of rifles. Sometimes captivity is not broken by fences. It is broken when you are allowed to speak, to write, to believe. When the enemy grants you what your own homeland never did. The gate swung open in the glare of the afternoon sun. Dust lifted in swirls as another patrol entered the camp. At first, the Japanese prisoners did not look closely. Soldiers passed through every day, boots thudding, rifles slung casually. But then the whispers began. "Anna?" A voice cracked in disbelief. The prisoners lifted their eyes. The patrol stepping through the gate was not only men. Among them walked women, American women, in pressed khaki jackets and caps pulled low across their brows. One carried a clipboard, another a medical satchel. Their belts carried pistols, their boots struck the ground in rhythm. The barrack erupted in murmurs. Keiko clutched the edge of her bunk, her eyes wide. Her lips formed a single word she had never imagined saying: impossible. In Japan, uniforms were sacred property of men. Women wore kimonos, aprons, headscarves. At most, a white smock with a red cross if they served as nurses. But here, in the enemy's land, women wore insignia and rank. Men around them obeyed, without hesitation. The American lieutenant with the clipboard barked an order in English. The male guards saluted, shifted, moved crates as she directed. The Japanese women gasped. It was not theater. It was not mockery. A woman had given orders, and men had followed. Aiko's throat tightened. She remembered her cousin in Nagoya, slapped across the face for trying on her brother's uniform cap. The words of her uncle echoed, "A woman who wears rank disgraces the emperor." Yet here, disgrace had become authority. Yumi leaned forward, whispering with a half-smile, "If they let women command, no wonder we lost." Her words drew nervous laughter, quickly silenced by sharp glares. But no one could deny the truth in them. The translator, seeing their shock, explained softly, "They are Women's Army Corps, officers, nurses, clerks. They serve in the army." The words spread like fire. Officers, women. The prisoners shifted uneasily. Some shook their heads, refusing to believe. Others stared at the dust where the boots had pressed, as if the prints themselves were proof of another world. Historians later noted this reaction in reports. Japanese female prisoners were astonished at the sight of American servicewomen. Red Cross inspectors wrote in neutral tones, "Female personnel present. Observed strong reaction from Japanese POWs." Behind those lines lay disbelief too large for words. Keiko whispered bitterly to herself, "We were told American men were beasts. Instead, we find women among them." She clenched her fists. "What else have we been blind to?" The lieutenant with the clipboard passed down the line, checking names against her list. Her expression was calm, professional. She did not glare, she did not smirk. To her, this was routine. To the prisoners, it was the collapse of centuries. When the patrol left, silence flooded the yard. The Japanese women stood frozen, their eyes still wide, their stomachs hollow despite the bread they had eaten. They had seen many things since capture, food, letters, medicine, but nothing had broken them like this. Sometimes the sharpest weapon is not a bomb or a bullet. It is the sight of what your world insists cannot exist, walking past you in uniform, commanding without fear. The news spread through the barracks like fire through dry grass. Even those who had not seen the American women with their own eyes whispered about them late into the night. Questions multiplied, sharper than hunger. How many were there? Were they real soldiers or only actors? Did they fight or only pose? The translator, weary of repeating himself, finally answered with numbers. By the end of the war, over 150,000 women served in the Women's Army Corps. His voice was calm, almost casual, but the words landed like artillery. Keiko whispered the number to herself, trying to comprehend it. 150,000, more than the population of her entire district in Osaka before the bombings. An army of women alone, larger than many Japanese cities. The translator continued. 86,000 served in the waves, the women of the U.S. Navy, thousands more in the SPARS, the Coast Guard unit. Over 1,000 flew as wasps, ferrying aircraft from factory to base, and 57,000 worked in the Army Nurse Corps, serving in every theater. The women stared in silence, their world tilted under the weight of arithmetic. Nearly 500,000 American women in uniform. In Japan, fewer than 10,000 had served formally, almost all as nurses, their roles stripped of authority. The rest had bent their backs in factories, weaving cloth for uniforms, pressing gunpowder into shells, growing food in empty fields. They were laborers, not soldiers. Aiko shook her head slowly, her voice hollow. They armed half their people, we silenced half of ours. Tomiko thought of her home in Yokosuka. She remembered women bent double in rice fields, their hair tied back with cloth, their hands blistered. She imagined those same women in boots and caps, pistols at their belts, giving orders. The image felt like a dream that mocked her. Historians confirmed the contrast. Japan clung to tradition, keeping women bound to hearth and field. The United States mobilized women as drivers, pilots, clerks, cryptographers, doctors. General Eisenhower himself declared, "We could not have won the war without the Women's Army Corps." For the Japanese prisoners, hearing such a statement was like staring at the sun. Keiko pressed her fists to her temples. She remembered propaganda slogans, "A woman's battlefield is the home." she whispered bitterly, and theirs was the world. The barracks filled with restless voices. Some women muttered that the sight of American women was shameful, proof of desperation. Others argued it was strength, proof of abundance. Yumi laughed softly, shaking her head. If I were American, I would have flown a plane. Her grin earned sharp glares, but no one could erase the picture her words painted. The translator added one final detail. In 1944, American women were decoding enemy codes. They helped break messages. They carried secrets. Their work shortened the war. The barrack fell silent again. Women holding the power of secrets? It was an image too large to grasp. That night, Keiko lay awake, staring into the darkness. She felt no hunger, no thirst, only a heavy ache in her chest. Numbers swirled in her mind, 500,000 women in uniform, an army larger than her imagination. She whispered into the void, if they doubled their strength with women, we never stood a chance. Sometimes defeat is not measured in cities burned or ships sunk. It is measured in the voices a nation allowed, and the voices it silenced. The lamps dimmed one by one, until only the glow of a single bulb lit the barrack. Outside, cicadas shrieked, their rhythm broken by the occasional clang of a guard's boots on gravel. Inside, the Japanese women lay on their bunks, eyes open, minds restless. No one could sleep. The sight of American women in uniform still pressed against their thoughts like a stone on the chest. Keiko broke the silence first. Her voice was tight, sharp. It is humiliation. They send women in boots to show us our weakness, to remind us that even their women stand above us. Aiko turned toward her, her face shadowed. No, she said quietly. It is more than humiliation. It is a wound. Everything we were told about strength, about order, it collapses when a woman carries rank. Yumi, lying on her side, giggled softly. Perhaps it is not collapse. Perhaps it is freedom. Imagine, a woman shouting orders and men obeying. I would like to try it once. Her laughter danced across the barrack, nervous but defiant. A sharp hiss silenced her. One of the older prisoners sat up, her hair streaked with gray. Her voice was bitter. Do not mock. It is shameful. If our men had fought harder, we would not be here. American women command only because their men are weak. Tomiko's voice rose from the corner, steady and low. But their men obey, without shame, without hesitation. Her words settled like dust after an explosion. The barrack fell quiet again. Keiko pressed her palms against her eyes. She remembered propaganda speeches, posters, radio broadcasts. The enemy is savage. Their women are frivolous, corrupt, degraded. Yet the lieutenant with the clipboard had not looked degraded. She had looked certain, composed, untouchable. That certainty haunted Keiko more than bombs ever had. Aiko whispered into the dark, if women can command, then what else have we been denied? The question trembled in the air. No one answered. Some turned away in anger. Others stared into the dark, unwilling to admit the truth forming in their own minds. Historians later recorded these arguments in fragments of diaries and testimonies. Japanese female prisoners were divided. Some clung to pride, insisting that American women were proof of barbarism. Others admitted envy, even admiration. The clash of voices in those barracks revealed a deeper fracture. Propaganda had promised unity, but reality was splitting them apart. Yumi stretched on her bunk, smiling faintly. If weakness is wearing boots, I would rather be weak. The others glared, but no one struck her. Her words lingered, stubborn as the heat. The single bulb flickered, buzzing faintly. The women lay awake long after, their whispers drifting into silence. For some, the sight of American women was humiliation, too bitter to swallow. For others, it was a forbidden glimpse of possibility. Keiko closed her eyes, her breath uneven. She whispered into the void, we lost not only to their men, we lost to their women too. Sometimes captivity is not forged by wire. It is forged by ideas too vast to ignore, tearing a room of prisoners into two nations, one clinging to pride, the other daring to dream. The day of the inspection began with a strange quiet. A car rolled through the gate, painted white, its doors marked with a red cross. Dust clung to its tires as it stopped in the center of the yard. From it stepped a man in a suit, carrying a leather case thick with papers. An interpreter followed, his face calm and unreadable. The prisoners watched, confused. The man was not a soldier. He wore no weapon, no insignia. His glasses glinted in the sun as he adjusted his notes. A guard explained briefly, "International Committee of the Red Cross. They inspect camps." The women exchanged startled glances. Inspections? Who inspected prisoners? In their world, prisoners disappeared. They were shadows erased by shame. No one came to check their condition. Yet here, an outsider arrived to count them, to question them, to record their treatment. The inspector walked slowly through the barracks. He peered at bunks, noted the size of windows, asked about food. He scribbled in careful handwriting, "Rations adequate, prisoners appear healthy." His voice was flat, his manner detached, but to the women, every stroke of his pen felt surreal. Their existence, their complaints, their astonishment, all were becoming lines in a document bound for Geneva. Later, he stopped to speak with the translator. He gestured toward the American female soldiers working near the infirmary. He made a note. Presence of female WWII officers observed. Japanese prisoners appeared surprised. That was all. No mention of disbelief, no description of jaws dropping or whispers breaking the silence. Just a single line. Appeared surprised. Keiko clenched her fists when she heard it. Appeared surprised? The phrase was too small, too dry, to contain what she felt. Her world had cracked in half, and in his book it became 3 words. Aiko whispered bitterly, "They reduce our collapse to a sentence." Her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. Historians would later find these reports in archives, stored in boxes, stamped with dates and codes. Neutral, factual, restrained. Mortality rates, calorie counts, square footage of barracks, and buried among them, occasional lines. Japanese female POWs expressed astonishment at presence of women in uniform. For the archivist, it was a curiosity. For the prisoners, it had been an earthquake. Tomiko sat on her bunk, hugging her knees. She whispered, "If they send this to Tokyo, no one will believe it." Her words carried the weight of truth. Back home, such reports would be filtered, censored, or dismissed as lies. The empire had spent years teaching its people that Americans were brutes. How could they accept records describing women soldiers giving orders, prisoners writing letters, rations being measured with care? Yumi, restless as always, muttered, "Maybe one day someone will read it and laugh. They will say, 'The prisoners saw women in boots and thought the world had ended.'" She chuckled softly, but no one else laughed. The inspector finished his work, packed his papers, and left as quietly as he had come. The car rolled out, the Red Cross fading into dust. For him, it was another camp, another report. For the women, it was proof that their astonishment would not vanish completely. It would live in an archive, disguised in dry ink. Keiko whispered to herself, "Our shock is history now, even if no one understands it." Sometimes history is not preserved in cries or shouts. It survives in sterile handwriting, where the collapse of a worldview is reduced to a line that reads simply, "Prisoners expressed surprise." The evening settled over the camp like a heavy blanket. The cicadas had gone quiet, leaving only the faint hum of the generator and the distant bark of a dog. Inside the barrack, the air was still. The women sat on their bunks, no one speaking for a long while. The day had been filled with contradictions: bread instead of blows, medicine instead of punishment, letters instead of silence. And now, the Red Cross inspector's visit lingered in their minds. He had written their astonishment into his book, but the words had felt too small. Prisoners expressed surprise. That was all their collapse had been reduced to. Keiko stared at the floorboards. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers tight. She whispered at last, her voice barely audible. Our empire told us we would be defiled, starved, erased. Instead, they feed us, heal us, even let us speak. What have we believed all these years? No one answered immediately. The silence was thick, as if each woman feared her own words. Aiko finally lifted her head. Her eyes glistened in the lamplight. The propaganda lied, not just once, not just in detail. It lied about the enemy's face, his heart, his laws. It lied so deeply that we no longer knew what truth was. Tomiko pressed her knees to her chest, her voice breaking. I was told Americans were beasts, but I saw a woman officer today. She commanded men with calm authority. No beast could look like that. No beast could carry discipline in her eyes. Yumi, restless even in despair, laughed softly. So the empire lost not only to their bombs, it lost to their women, to their bread, to their pens and papers. She lay back, grinning faintly. Perhaps that is why defeat tastes so bitter. It is flavored with kindness. The older prisoner in the corner spat into the dirt, shaking her head. Kindness humiliates more than cruelty. Cruelty we could endure, but this mercy. Her voice trailed into silence. The barrack fell quiet again. Outside, the moon rose above the wire, pale and indifferent. The shadows of the fence stretched long across the yard. Historians would later write that Japanese female prisoners were transformed by captivity. Some carried the memory of shock for decades, speaking of it only in old age. Others buried it, ashamed that they had believed lies so easily. But the truth remained. In the camps of America, they learned that the enemy did not match the monster their homeland had painted. Keiko lay down on her bunk, staring at the rafters. She whispered to herself, not sure if anyone else could hear. We were defeated twice, first on the battlefield, and then in our beliefs. The lamp hissed, the shadows deepened. Around her, the other women shifted, each one lost in thought. None of them spoke again. The silence of the barrack was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of collapse. Sometimes empires fall, not when cities burn, but when lies are exposed. And for these women, defeat came not with fire, but with bread, letters, medicine, and the sight of an enemy nothing like the propaganda had promised.